Imagine holding an incredibly detailed ancient map where the key to deciphering all the symbols has just been lost for centuries.
Oh, wow, yeah. That sounds frustrating.
Right, you can see the lines, you can trace the topography, you recognize that there's a distinct structure to all of it, but you just cannot unlock what the actual destination is supposed to be.
It's all just shapes on a page at that point.
Yeah, and for a lot of readers, that is precisely what looking at the Old Testament feels like.
Oh, absolutely.
It is this massive compilation of seemingly disconnected rituals, genealogies, terrifying visions, and really obscure poetry.
And without the cipher, it is basically a murky, sealed book.
Yes, a sealed book. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into an extensive analysis of John Owen's writings.
A fantastic topic.
We're specifically looking at a text called The Glory of Christ, Representations of the Glory of Christ under the Old Testament.
Which is quite a title, but it's so vital.
It really is. Because this source material provides a very specific theological lens for reading these ancient scriptures. The mission for our conversation today, for you listening, is to understand how the entire Old Testament is what Owen calls a line of life and light.
Pointing directly to the Messiah.
Yes, pointing right at him. We are going to look at how applying this specific lens removes that veil of darkness, the thing that makes these ancient books feel so confusing and closed off to a modern reader.
Well, and that veil of darkness is really the crucial starting point here.
How so?
I mean, if you approach these ancient texts as just a collection of moral fables or historical records of ancient Near Eastern legal codes, you are going to hit a brick wall very quickly.
Yeah, you'll be lost in Leviticus within a day.
Precisely. Without this specific lens, which Owen defines as faith discovering the glory of the Messiah, readers are left completely blind to the actual substance of the text.
So it's not just about reading comprehension.
No, not at all. You could read the Hebrew words, understand the grammar flawlessly, know the geopolitical history of the surrounding nations, and yet still miss the entire point of what is being communicated.
Wow, so you can have all the academic knowledge and still be totally blind to the meaning.
Yeah. That's the premise here. The idea is that Moses, the prophets, all the writers of these ancient scriptures, they were actively engaged in creating a unified testimony.
A unified testimony.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the physical outward structures of ancient religion.
Right, the tangible stuff.
Yeah, Owen makes this massive argument that God designed earthly objects to signify heavenly realities.
Which is a huge paradigm shift for how we view stuff like the tabernacle.
Right. You're talking about the tabernacle, the temple, the holy place, the utensils, the oracle, the ark, the cherubim, the high priest's vestments, and, well, the sacrifices too.
Specifically the annual sprinkling of blood.
Yes. According to the text, these were all designed in divine wisdom to represent the person and office of Christ. And I really want to linger on this because we tend to think of physical religious objects as just, props to help people focus.
Like a visual aid for a sermon or something?
Yeah. But Owen says it goes way beyond that.
It goes vastly beyond props or aesthetics. The key phrase to focus on here is divine wisdom.
Divine wisdom.
Yeah. The source makes a sharp, distinct line between human invention and divine institution.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, when human beings try to create outward worship, we are highly limited by our own finite nature. I mean, men cannot create mysteries.
We can't speak things into objective reality.
Right. We cannot assign a mystical signification to a natural thing and make it objectively true.
So, like, if I take a silver chalice, place it on a table, and declare that it represents a heavenly reality.
Your declaration holds no actual weight.
Because I'm just a guy with a cup?
Yeah. It is an empty symbol. It is theater. Only divine institutions can act as a true shadow, where the body represented by that shadow is the Messiah.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this. You are saying if I, as a human, decide to add a beautiful, elaborate ceremony into a worship service to make it feel more significant, it is fundamentally just an artistic expression.
That is what the source text argues, yes.
But if the divine architect mandates the specific measurements of a tent, the fabric of a curtain, or the carving of a wooden cherubim, it possesses a factual, metaphysical link to a heavenly reality.
Yes.
That is a massive distinction.
It is the defining distinction of the entire ancient sacrificial system. Hebrews chapter 9 is referenced here, noting that Moses was faithful to give an antecedent testimony, of things to be spoken
An
afterward.
antecedent testimony, so a precursor.
Exactly. Moses was not just organizing a religious community, he was constructing a tangible, three-dimensional representation of something that had not yet been fully revealed in human history.
So the Israelites weren't just going through the motions of a legal code.
No, every time the ancient Israelites interacted with these objects, whether it was the daily sacrifices or the vast solemn assembly of the Day of Atonement, they were experiencing veiled glimpses of glory.
Veiled glimpses.
Yeah, the text states that these glimpses acted as the very life of the church of old. The physical architecture was a vocabulary they used to understand the grace they were receiving.
Okay, let us try to put ourselves in the sandals of someone standing in the dusty courtyard of the tabernacle for a second.
Okay, set the scene.
They are watching the high priest in these incredibly elaborate vestments, garments woven with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, bearing precious stones with the names of the tribes.
Very striking visuals.
Yeah, and they are smelling the intense, specific mixture of incense. They are seeing the visceral reality of the sacrifices, the smoke, the blood.
It's a full sensory experience.
It is. I look at the tabernacle like an architect's three-dimensional scale model.
Right, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, like if you walk into an architecture firm, you might see a small, highly detailed scale model of a skyscraper sitting on a table in the lobby.
Right, with all the tiny little windows.
Yeah. Now, you cannot live in that model. You cannot work in it. But it shows you precisely what the architect intends to build. Every tiny window, every column, every structural support in that model has a purpose because it corresponds to the final massive building that will eventually dominate the skyline.
That hits the nail on the head.
So if human inventions in worship cannot hold mystical signification, does that mean all our modern attempts to add splendid ceremonies to worship are an active distraction from what God already instituted?
That is the logical conclusion drawn directly from the source text.
Really, an active distraction.
Well, Owen states very plainly that the ancient institutions have the advantage above all the splendid ceremonies that men can invent in the outward worship of God.
Wow, even if they are beautiful.
Even then, when people invent ceremonies, no matter how emotionally moving or aesthetically pleasing they might be, they lack that divine link. They do not possess the capacity to act as a shadow cast by the body of the Messiah.
Because we didn't design the real building, so to speak.
Right. By focusing on human-invented ceremonies, an individual might obscure the divine blueprint. Think about your architect analogy for a second.
Okay.
If a well-meaning person walks into that lobby and decides the scale model of the skyscraper looks a little plain, so they glue some sparkly beads and tiny plastic flags to the side of it.
They have not improved the model.
No, they have ruined its accuracy.
Oh, wow. That makes a lot of sense.
The ancient system, with its annual sprinkling of blood in the most holy place, was a complete, sealed system of religious worship entirely focused on representing the glory of his person in his office. Substituting that with human ideas breaks the architectural model.
That is a staggering way to view those long, tedious chapters in Exodus and Leviticus.
The ones everyone usually skips.
Yeah. We often look back at the exhaustive rules for the ancient tabernacle. You know, the specific loops on the curtains, the specific rings for the carrying poles, and we feel exhausted just reading them.
Right, it feels like reading a stereo manual.
Exactly. But if every single utensil in the holy place was a deliberate divine shadow, then reading about them is like studying the character of the Messiah in physical, tactile form.
Yes, the bronze altar shows the requirement of justice.
The golden lampstand shows the provision of light,
It is a physical, theological education.
which is amazing.
Which is also why the transition in the source material is so fascinating.
Where does it go next?
Well, we have spent all this time looking at the outward physical architecture of worship, the gold, the wood, the fabric, the visceral reality of the blood, but the text does not stop at the external structures.
Right.
It immediately pivots our focus from the physical environment to the inward, intensely emotional reality of the believer's relationship with God.
Because the physical structures were never meant to be sterile.
No, they were meant to facilitate a relationship.
This brings us to the heart's dialogue and mystical communion.
Yes, shifting to the Song of Solomon.
Now, anyone who has read through the Old Testament knows this is a book that often makes people incredibly uncomfortable.
Well, very much so.
It is highly poetic, intensely romantic, and filled with effective language.
People don't usually know what to do with it.
No, they don't. But Owen identifies King Solomon as a type of Christ and a penman of the Holy Ghost. He views this entire book as a gracious record of divine communications of love and grace and the church's return of love and delight.
which is a massive tonal shift from measuring curtains and slaughtering goats.
Right, from blood and bronze to Livy's and poetry.
But theologically, it is the necessary counterpart.
How so?
Well, the outward institutions of worship give us the legal and physical structure of atonement, right?
Yes.
But this inward communion gives us the substance of the relationship that the atonement purchased.
Ah, I see.
The text describes this book as a holy dialogue. It contains the most intimate expressions of a blessed intercourse and communion with the Messiah.
Which is beautiful.
It is. However, the tragedy highlighted in the source is that this book is widely neglected, despised, or even ridiculed today.
Ridiculed.
Yeah, because these concepts of intense spiritual affection are little understood by many modern readers.
And the language Owen uses to describe those who ridicule the book is pretty intense.
He doesn't hold back.
He talks about mockers who are foaming out their own shame. He says they walk after their own ungodly lusts, completely missing the holy dialogue happening in the text.
Because they're looking at it through a purely carnal lens.
Right. To look at a record of divine love and only see something to make crude jokes about, well, it shows a complete blindness to this spiritual reality. It's like someone walking into an art gallery looking at a masterpiece and only complaining about the frame.
It demonstrates the literal veil of darkness we mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation.
The cipher is missing.
Yeah. If an individual lacks the lens of faith discovering the glory of the Messiah, they will read the Song of Solomon and see nothing but an ancient love poem.
Just ancient Near Eastern erotic literature.
Entirely missing the theological weight. But for the believer, the text argues that this book provides holy strains of delight, solemn and divine complacency, and an ardency of affection.
Let us pause on that phrase. Solemn and divine complacency.
It's an interesting word choice.
Yeah, we need to clarify that because the modern definition of complacency implies, well, laziness, apathy, or a refusal to improve.
Right, like
But-
resting on your laurels.
Exactly. But that is an older usage of the word. In this context, complacency means a deep, settled pleasure and satisfaction. It is the feeling of absolute rest in a relationship where you know you are completely secure.
Yes, a profound, well, I should say an unshakable contentment in the presence of the divine.
Unshakable contentment. That's good.
And the text brings this directly to you, the listener, right now. It states that a few days or even a few hours spent in this frame of mind, experiencing this solemn and divine complacency outlined in the book, excels all the treasures of the earth.
That is quite a claim.
It is an invitation to step out of the frantic, anxiety-driven pace of modern life and experience a highly focused, deeply satisfied affection for the divine.
And it offers a pretty challenging comparison between modern readers and ancient believers, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
This part really caught my attention, and honestly, it felt like a bit of a conviction.
Oh, for sure.
The source says that we, sitting here today, have the full revelation of the New Testament. We have the clear historical realization of what the ancient Israelites only saw in physical shadows.
We have the completed story.
Yeah, we know the name, we know the history, we know the outcome of the cross and the empty tomb. Yet if we fall short of those ancient believers' ardency of affection and their continual holy admiration, we risk being judged unworthy of what we have received.
It is a stark, sobering warning.
It really is.
The ancient believers had outward shadows and this poetic record of inward communion, and it produced in them raptures of joy. They showed extreme diligence and attendance to the means of enjoying communion.
They fought for that joy.
They did. We have the substance, the clear historical fact, the completed scriptures, and yet we often lack that same ardency of affection. We treat the clear revelation as common or ordinary.
Now, I am trying to hold these two massive concepts together in my mind, and I need you to help me bridge them.
Okay, let's try.
How do we reconcile the strict, bloody, legal shadows of the tabernacle sacrifices with this highly poetic, effective dialogue of love found in the Song of Solomon?
It's a great question.
Because, I mean, how do those two extremes, the slaughter of an animal on a bronze altar and a poetic song about the sweetness of love, exist in the exact same theological framework?
They exist together because they represent two necessary aspects of the exact same reality.
Walk me through that.
The tabernacle sacrifices deal with the mechanics of justice. They show how a perfectly holy God can dwell in the midst of a sinful, rebellious people without consuming them.
Right. It requires blood.
It requires blood, it requires a substitute, it requires strict, unflinching adherence to divine justice. That is the legal reality.
And the Song of Solomon.
The Song of Solomon deals with the result of that justice being satisfied. The result is unhindered, joyful, affectionate communion.
Oh, so you need one for the other.
You cannot have the holy strains of delight without the annual sprinkling of blood making the way clear.
Yeah.
The blood removes the barrier. The song is the celebration of the barrier being gone. They are the objective work and the subjective experience of the same divine grace.
The blood removes the barrier, and the song is the celebration. That is a brilliant way to
It
frame it.
really ties it all together.
It does.
Yeah.
And that natural progression leads us to the next massive shift in the source material. We've seen the physical objects representing him and the poetic expressions describing emotional communion with him.
Right.
Now, the source moves to literal physical manifestations.
The physical appearances.
Yes, we are talking about the pre-incarnate rehearsals or personal appearances. These are moments where God temporarily assumed a physical form to interact with his people.
The text details appearances to several eminent leaders in the ancient world. Abraham, Jacob, Moses, and Joshua.
These are major pivotal moments in the Old Testament.
Very pivotal. But the text is extraordinarily careful to clarify the theological nature of these appearances.
Clarify it how?
Well, he did not create a permanent human nature for this specific season. He was as yet God only. But by his divine strength, he assumed a shape composed of ethereal substance, which was immediately dissolved afterwards.
So it wasn't the incarnation yet.
No, he acted in the shape of a man to signify what he would eventually be.
It makes me think of an actor stepping onto a stage in full costume for a quick rehearsal before the actual production begins centuries later.
Yeah, just trying out the role.
The actor wears the clothes, walks the stage, speaks the lines, and interacts with the other players. But the main event, the opening night, is still a long way off.
Right.
After the rehearsal, the costume is put away. The body, made of ethereal substance, is dissolved. But the memory of that interaction fundamentally changes the human who experienced it.
I mean, Jacob literally wrestles with this figure.
Right. Abraham shares a meal with him. Joshua falls on his face before him as the commander of the Lord's army.
If we take your actor analogy further, the ethereal substance was the ultimate prop costume. It was completely convincing, it allowed for real physical interaction, but it was not the permanent reality.
And it left a lasting impact.
What's fascinating here is how the text connects these physical appearances to the very language used throughout the Old Testament.
The language itself.
Yeah, the author introduces the concept of anthropopathies.
Okay, let's define that for everyone.
Anthropopathies. This is the theological term for the practice of attributing human emotions and physical reactions to God.
Describing him as grieving, repenting, being angry, or being well-pleased.
Exactly.
We read those descriptions all the time. We read that God was grieved in his heart before the flood, or that his anger burned against Israel.
I usually just brush past them, right?
Yeah, a simple literary metaphor is because we know God is a spirit.
But the source argues it goes much, much deeper than a simple literary device. Owen states it would be absurd to bring God under perpetual anthropopathies, to constantly describe him with finite human emotions, if not for a very specific reason.
Which is?
The reason is that the divine person intended to take on the human nature wherein such affections naturally dwell.
Wait, really? So every human emotion described to God?
Every time the Old Testament describes God with a human emotion, it is a deliberate, forward-looking hint at the incarnation.
That is mind-blowing.
It is a linguistic rehearsal for the historical reality. When it says God grieved, it is pointing toward the one who would be called a man of sorrows.
So absolutely everything in the Old Testament regarding God's dealings with the church has respect to the future incarnation.
Yes, everything.
The physical appearances, the attribution of human emotions, the institutions of worship, the poetry. It is a unified, hyper-focused system, all pointing in one single direction.
It's all connected.
The Old Testament is not a random collection of ancient books. It is a meticulously coordinated symphony.
Yeah. And as we move forward into the text, we see the intensity of these interactions skyrocket.
From the rehearsals to something bigger.
We shift from these temporary earthly human shapes walking with Abraham or wrestling in the dust with Jacob to something much more overwhelming. This brings us to the prophetical visions.
Right. The source material analyzes the visions granted to the prophets regarding his heavenly glory and terrifying holiness.
Which is a whole different level of interaction.
It is. The primary example given is the vision of Isaiah in chapter 6 of his book. The text notes the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 41, explicitly confirms this was a vision of Christ's glory.
John makes that connection explicitly clear.
Yeah. Isaiah sees a divine person exalted on a throne high and lifted up, and the text says, his train filled the temple.
Now, Owen's interpretation of that phrase, his train filled the temple, is highly specific and beautifully theological.
He doesn't just think it's a long piece of fabric.
No, he identifies this train not just as fabric on a robe, but as the whole train of his glorious grace filling the temple of his body.
Ah.
He references Colossians 2:9, noting that this body is the true tabernacle, the temple wherein dwelt the fullness of the Godhead bodily.
So the vision presented to Isaiah was not just a generic, blinding display of light.
Not at all. It was a specific, coded representation of the incarnation and the immense grace that would flow from it.
But the immediate reaction from Isaiah was not joyful communion.
No, it wasn't.
It was not the solemn and divine complacency we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The text says this vision filled him with dread and astonishment.
He was completely undone.
He cries out, "Woe is me, for I am undone." He was terrified. He thought he was going to die right there on the spot.
And that absolute dread is the natural, inevitable human reaction for a finite, sinful creature encountering absolute, unshielded holiness.
It's the only logical response.
But notice how the relief comes to Isaiah. The source points out that Isaiah was relieved by an act of the ministry of that glorious one. A seraph flies to him, taking away his iniquity by pressing a burning coal from the altar to his lips.
So the coal typified the purifying efficacy of his sacrifice.
Yes. The vision provided both the terrifying reality of divine holiness and the immediate, gracious solution of divine atonement.
A complete package.
This entire sequence provided spiritual food for the souls of ancient believers. It taught them the seriousness of sin and the certainty of purification.
The source also connects this to another terrifying manifestation, probably the most famous one in the ancient world. The appearance on Mount Sinai at the giving of the law in Exodus 19.
Oh, Sinai, yes.
The text references Psalm 68 and Ephesians 4, connecting Sinai to the ascension of Christ after his resurrection. Now, Sinai was defined by outward terror.
It was absolutely
It
terrifying.
was a mountain covered in thick black smoke, lightning, fire, an earthquake, and the loud blast of a trumpet. It was the severity of a fiery law that represented a curse to anyone who broke it.
The giving of that law was essentially a sentence of death to the people standing at the foot of the mountain because of its strict, unyielding holiness and the severity of the curse attending it.
They begged Moses to make the voice stop speaking.
They couldn't handle it. Yet the text states that believers view Sinai with mercy regarding the accomplishment of that law.
Now, let me push back on this, or at least ask you to untangle this, because it sounds completely contradictory.
Okay, let's untangle it.
If Sinai was defined by fiery terror, a severe curse, and an unyielding law, something that represented absolute death to the people present, how do we logically connect that to the ascension of Christ and the concept of life, pardon, and mercy?
It resolves through the concept of absolute fulfillment.
Fulfillment of the law.
Yes. The fulfilling of that very same terrifying law by the Messiah is what issues pardon and righteousness to the believer.
So the law doesn't just go away.
The law itself is not abolished or swept under the rug. It is perfectly satisfied. The fiery terror of Sinai demonstrates the insurmountable requirement of divine justice. It shows you the standard.
And the standard is perfection.
Right. The ascension of the Messiah demonstrates that this specific insurmountable requirement has been met perfectly by him.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the believer looks back at the terror of Sinai, not with fear, but with immense gratitude, because the severity of that curse was absorbed and satisfied by the one who ascended.
The terror of the mountain highlights the magnitude of the mercy of the cross.
Exactly.
That is a staggering way to read the text. It turns a scene of ultimate dread into the structural bedrock for ultimate peace.
You cannot fully appreciate the pardon unless you understand the heat of the fire on Sinai.
And that natural resolution leads us right into the explicit promises. We transition from the terrifying, overwhelming visions of the prophets into concrete, specific doctrines.
The explicit declarations.
We are moving from the visual and the atmospheric to the explicit declarations about a coming king.
And the source material focuses heavily on Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
Very famous verses.
Yeah, and the discussion also points to Luke 24 and John 5:39, where the Messiah appeals directly to the scriptures against his adversaries, telling them to search the writings because they testify of him.
Let's talk about the adversaries mentioned in the source. This specific prophecy in Isaiah 9 is identified by Owen as sufficient to confound all enemies of this glory.
He specifically names a few groups.
He specifically names Jews, Socinians, and others who reject the revelation. Now, the audience might be familiar with the broader theological debates, but let's define that term organically.
Sure, the Socinians.
He is calling out specific groups who reject this, like the Socinians, a movement that historically denied the pre-existence of Christ and his divine nature.
Right, they denied the incarnation.
The text talks about a phenomenon called judicial blindness and satanical pride. This occurs when people reject the clear, explicit doctrine of the incarnation despite the overwhelming evidence.
Judicial blindness is a terrifying concept.
What does it mean in this context?
It implies that a person has closed their eyes to the truth for so long that eventually they lose the ability to open them.
Wow.
Let's look at the contrast the source sets up between the ancient believers and modern skeptics. The ancient believers received these promises. They acquiesced to the truth of the revelation, even though they lived in a time of much darkness regarding the specifics.
They didn't have all the details.
No, they could frame no specific notions of the exact manner of its accomplishment. They knew a child would be born who was somehow also the mighty God, but the biology and the mechanics of how that would happen were a complete mystery to them.
But they believed anyway.
Yet they believed the promise.
Contrast that with the situation after the gospel accounts are written.
The modern skeptic.
Yeah. The text states that now every single word of the prophecy is explained, declared, and its mystical sense visibly laid open in historical reality.
It's all out in the open.
The historical accomplishment perfectly answers every single expression in the ancient prophecy.
Yeah.
The child was born. The government is upon his shoulders. He proved himself to be the mighty God.
Down to the smallest detail.
To see the prophecy and then see the historical fulfillment that matches it detail for microscopic detail and still reject it, the text labels this as judicial blindness and satanical pride.
It is the ultimate expression of human arrogance. I am thinking about a modern skeptic in this context.
Give me an analogy.
It is like someone who is handed a highly detailed ancient map. They walk the path, they follow every landmark, they arrive at the proper coordinates, they dig in the dirt, and they find the treasure precisely where the map indicated.
Right.
But instead of rejoicing, they refuse to believe the map is real.
They just deny it.
They claim it is a coincidence or a forgery, purely out of pride in their own intellect. They refuse to admit that the maker of the map possessed knowledge greater than their own.
That is spot on.
Ooh.
They would rather deny the existence of the treasure in their own hands than admit they were not the smartest person in the room.
This raises an important question regarding the condition of the human heart.
Which is?
The text states that the hearts of men will admit of no effects of infinite wisdom, but what they suppose they can distinctly comprehend.
So if we can't understand it, we reject it.
If human reason cannot fully dissect, categorize, and explain the infinite wisdom of God, such as the incarnation of the infinite creator into a finite human pride, simply shuts its eyes against the light of truth.
Willful ignorance.
It is a willful blindness. They prefer to stay in the dark rather than admit there is a light that completely outshines their own intellectual capacity.
It is a sobering assessment of human intellect. We pride ourselves on being enlightened, rational, and logical. But the text suggests that relying solely on our own comprehension actually makes us blind to the greatest realities in the universe.
It really does.
If we demand that God must fit inside our skull to be real, we are worshiping our own brains.
Which is why the source material then shifts gears so dramatically for the final major concept.
Moving from the intellect to nature.
We move from the high, lofty doctrines of incarnation, governmental rule, and judicial blindness down to the most accessible, everyday items in the natural world.
We're talking about the vocabulary of creation. The source material shows how creation itself is a teaching tool.
An incredibly vivid teaching tool.
It is full of metaphorical expressions specifically designed to set out the glory of the Messiah. We are talking about things you can find outside your window right now. A rose, a lily, a pearl, a vine, a lion, a lamb.
Owen uses a phrase here that I cannot stop thinking about. The infinite condescension of divine wisdom.
Infinite condescension.
Think about what that phrase actually implies. Divine wisdom is infinite. It is vastly, immeasurably beyond our capacity to understand.
Right.
Spiritual excellencies cannot be distinctly comprehended by the finite human mind in their raw form. So God condescends. He lowers the method of instruction.
He makes it accessible.
He compresses infinite data into finite biological structures. He uses natural things that we naturally discern through our five senses to give us a tangible sense of those invisible spiritual realities.
So let's break down the mechanics of these metaphors,
Yeah.
because it's not just arbitrary symbolism.
No, it's very deliberate.
He calls him the rose for the sweet savor of his love, grace, and obedience. He uses the lily for his gracious beauty and amiableness.
The pearl of price represents his immense worth.
The vine illustrates his fruitfulness. The lion demonstrates his power and might. The lamb shows his meekness and fitness for sacrifice.
Let's look at the mechanism of the vine, for example.
The vine.
How does the biological reality of a vine producing fruit actively demonstrate spiritual fruitfulness? A vine possesses life within itself, and it pushes that life, the sap, the nutrients outward into the branches so they can produce grapes.
Without the central vine, the branch is just dead wood.
By creating the biological mechanism of a vine, God was creating a living, growing, photosynthesizing illustration of how the Messiah supplies spiritual life to his people.
That is so cool.
Notice how comprehensive this entire list is. It covers aesthetics with the beauty of the lily, it covers economic value with the pearl, it covers biological function with the vine.
And it covers seemingly contradictory attributes, too.
Yeah, the raw apex predator might of the lion and the vulnerable, defenseless meekness of the sacrificial lamb. All of these creatures and items were designed to represent an excellency that is spiritually found in him.
So what does this all mean for the person listening to this right now? It implies that the natural world is a massive, living treasury of divine truths.
It absolutely is.
A walk through a botanical garden is no longer just a biological observation. It is an opportunity for contemplation of the scriptures. Watching an animal in a field becomes a lesson in theology.
The physical world is not just a random collection of atoms bouncing against each other. It is a carefully curated classroom.
If we connect this to the bigger picture we have discussed today, it completes the entire system.
It brings it all full circle.
We started with the physical architecture of the tabernacle, divinely instituted objects made of wood, gold, and fabric.
Then we saw the poetry of the Song of Solomon mapping out the emotional landscape.
Then the physical, ethereal bodies assumed in the rehearsals with the patriarchs.
Then the terrifying, majestic visions of the prophets and the explicit historical prophecies.
And finally, the very biology of a rose, a vine, or a lion. The physical universe itself was designed with the intention of providing a vocabulary to explain the Messiah.
Everything in the Old Testament and everything in the natural world is part of this continuous line of life and light.
We have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive.
We really have.
We started with the physical shadows of the tabernacle and the strict, bloody regulations of ancient worship. We moved through the emotional, poetic communion described in the Song of Solomon.
We looked at the physical rehearsals of the patriarchs interacting with temporary ethereal forms.
We analyzed the terrifying, majestic visions of prophets like Isaiah and the fiery, unyielding law of Sinai.
We discussed the explicit promises of the incarnation in Isaiah 9 and the absolute tragedy of judicial blindness.
And we finished by looking at the biology of lilies and lions in the natural world. It changes the cipher. You realize the ancient gears of the text are not broken. You just needed the right key to start the machine.
Reading the ancient texts, and indeed reading the natural world, requires this specific lens. It requires faith discovering the glory of the Messiah.
Without it, you're just looking at a sealed book.
Without that lens, the Old Testament remains a sealed book, full of disconnected rituals, confusing poetry, and harsh laws. But with the lens, it becomes a unified, brilliant, breathing testimony.
A line of life and light.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today.
I love a good final thought.
We talked about the architect's 3D model, where every tiny detail has a purpose pointing to the final building.
Right.
If the architect of the universe designed every physical detail, from the specific measurements of an ancient tent in the desert to the biological traits of a rose blooming in a garden, specifically to give you a vocabulary to understand divine grace, how should that alter the way you look at the mundane physical objects you'll interact with for the rest of your day?